It was chaos, bedlam, and it was scary as hell.
Every man in my boat was killed, and practically everybody else of that first wave died.
We knew within a few minutes that we weren't going to make it. It was one big wave, and 35 tons just sank in a hurry.
This is the story of a lost hour in the greatest invasion the world has ever seen. A quest to discover why on one beach D-Day went so badly wrong. The answer lies not in history books, but here at the bottom of the sea, locked within wrecks that have remained undisturbed for over half a century. In June 1944, this tranquil stretch of French coastline witnessed the beginning of the end of the Second World War. Here, on the infamous Omaha beach, the carnage was almost unimaginable.
I was told to break radio silence when I'd landed the Americans on Omaha Beach. And my signal, I think, was something to the effect that A Company landed at 06:30 hours with light opposition. It was quiet and orderly when I left the beach. It was a gloomy morning. We only sort of saw light about 6 o'clock, and then it was gloomy. It was a couple of days before I was told what happened. Every man in my boat was killed, and practically everybody else of that first wave died. I didn't realize that there was so much opposition, such a terrible fate awaited them.
Over 2,000 men died that day. But the horror of those few hours might have been very different if a secret weapon designed especially for the invasion had made it to the beach. Brett Fanoff is an American underwater archaeologist. He's here to find out what remains of that extraordinary machine he's heard so much about.
I think they wanted the element of surprise. I mean, that was the official doctrine, that it looked like a harmless rubber raft coming ashore ahead of the infantry, and that it would just suddenly appear out of the sea, a tank. You look out at the sea and you can't help but stand there and think, my God, there must be a tremendous amount of material here that nobody's looked at.
The history of D-Day is well known, but Brett is convinced that there is still more to be discovered on the seabed.
These wrecks are sort of snapshots, they're photographs, they're uncorrupted moments in time. It's captivating. What's on the seafloor reflects how the battle was fought at sea, getting the troops ashore, and we can use it to check the historical accounts because there's so much confusion as to what really happened when.
Now, with the backing of the Institute of Nautical Archaeology, he has the equipment to make the first detailed scientific search of the seas off Omaha Beach. Brett studied the charts of the Normandy coastline. He knows there are hundreds of wrecks down there, and amongst them should be the targets he's looking for. A sonar scan of the seabed has revealed 13 ghostly shapes at a depth of 30 meters. They appear intact. Brett believes these are the tanks he's come to find. Tanks have been a lifelong obsession. He used to drive them for the US Army. Jeff Harris, an expert in marine technology, has joined the team. He will drive the ROV, a highly sophisticated underwater robot camera. Live video pictures are fed back up to the surface.
take yourself a minute to figure it out.
The ROV has its own onboard sonar to help locate the first target.
Open it back up to polar so we can see the majority of the wreck. It should be off to the
that's what I'm
port
doing
side.
now. You're on polar now.
Scan reverse. Scan reverse it. There's no reason to go to that side.
Somewhere in these murky waters lies the wreckage they are so desperate to find. A battalion of floating tanks, doomed to failure.
What the hell is that?
There's a track.
There's
See
a
it?
track. There's a track right there.
Damn, man.
Can you?
That's definitely a track. It's a mean.
Part of looks like part of the forward hull and one of the rusted tracks.
Yeah. So I think this is the
Forward. This is
This-
the forward
see it?
slope. There's the
Remember?
machine gun. Wait, go in. That's the machine gun.
chill and get your finger out of
Sorry,
the feed.
man. Is that the gun barrel?
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Look at how overgrown it is. These things are in really bad shape.
Over half a century on the seabed has taken its toll. But Brett can still identify it as one of the tanks he's looking for. The DD, or duplex drive tank, was designed specifically for D-Day. It was an American Sherman, but fitted with propellers and an inflatable canvas skirt designed to keep afloat all 35 tons. They would launch from a boat and motor in at just 4 miles an hour. The top of the canvas barely a meter above the waterline.
What's this right here? Is that a rope?
Is that
Oh, I wonder if that's one of the metal, the bands, you know, for the
Right.
for the flotation skirt. I think that's what it is. Yeah. They had hoops, metal hoops, like a hoop skirt for a woman. They had hoops that kept the canvas out. It's broken off. You see it?
Yeah.
That's fantastic.
I thought it was a bad idea before, but now, you know, every time I see one, it reinforces the sacrifice that people made who fought the battle. That's all. I mean, how eerie it is now on the bottom, and how horrific it must have been on that day, just getting in those tanks. And that's before the shooting started on the beaches.
Phil Fitz from Virginia was 23 years old when he began his training on the tanks.
I was the first tank off that night, and one of the Navy boys said to me, "Hey, soldier, you're not going to take that thing out here, are you?" He had never seen us in operation. And I said, "Yeah, that's where we're going." He said, "Boy, I would never do that." I said, "That's why they gave this job to the Army. They know the Navy wouldn't do it."
The DD tanks relied on the fact that they concealed their true purpose. The hope was that they sat so low in the water, they appeared to be no more of a threat than a rubber boat paddling ashore. But once they got to the beach, the tank crews dropped their canvas screens and started to fire at close range. They would spearhead the D-Day invasion. It was essential they landed first to provide cover for the infantry that followed, a lesson learned the hard way. In 1942, the Allies had invaded the port of Dieppe with horrific results.
The basic principle they used was they put the infantry in first, so the landing crafts came in, could be seen easily from the shore and were, and as the door of the landing craft opened and the infantry came out, they were mowed down by machine guns, practically wiped out. Then came the tanks, and in came the landing craft, the doors opened, out came the tanks, and they were picked off one by one by the 88mm guns. And so they lost all the tanks, most of the infantry, and the thing was a shambles. The first lesson they learnt was that to put infantry ashore without adequate fire support into the face of a defended port is suicide.
To avoid another slaughter, the Allies would need to ensure the tanks got to the beach first. Harry Webb used to train the British tank crews on the DDs. He's now based at Bovington Tank Museum in Dorset, where he's giving Brett the chance to relive his tank driving days, this time on a Second World War Sherman.
Sorry! What's more manly? What's more hardcore than a tank? You know, you're 18 and you're invulnerable and you're in this monster of a machine that knocked down trees like toothpicks, and it's got a big gun sticking out the front that you can hit things miles away with. It's just a beast. It's like testosterone cast in steel. Shall we go one more time?
We did that. We got a good change there
You
as well.
like that? I felt good about that one for a change.
That's made your day, hasn't
Yeah,
it?
it did. It really did.
In training, DDs were launched over 2,000 times. Nothing was left to chance.
They take us on both day and night trips out into the channel and drop us into the channel, into the water, give us a gyro compass reading on the compass, and we'd go back to shore, and you wouldn't know where you were until you felt the tank run up on the beach. We did that many, many times, and that gave us a lot of confidence.
Do you think the men that launched, that you knew, do you think they had faith in the DD system?
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, they were schooled. I mean, as you know, in all the army, drill makes perfection.
Yeah.
And they were sort of semi-brainwashed into the ability of the tank to do the job.
Not only were they trained how to operate the floating tank, they were also taught what to do if it sank.
They were aware of the fact that it could sink. All during the training, everywhere along the line, they kept saying, now, if something goes wrong and it sinks, this is what you do. Because they taught us how to put the breathing bottle in your mouth and turn it on. And we had a 5-minute breathing bottle and a ribbon around our neck, a little tank right here, and a mouthpiece you stick in your mouth and turn it on, and you start breathing. It's good for 5 minutes undersea.
The only thing between the crew and the sea was a thin bit of canvas. This is the last DD tank with canvas screen still intact. It's a rare chance for Brett to get a close look at this extraordinary machine.
The commander was the only man that could actually see what was going on because he was up high enough to look over the top of the screen. The driver didn't see anything at all. He took his command from the commander, who was stood on a plinth at the back.
Couldn't help it. I was holding on to it. I got a roll and just let it went.
3 miles offshore, the team are searching for another tank.
This is your first go solo, is it, on this thing?
Yeah.
Brett has asked Jimmy Green to join him on board.
I may not get a license, but...
Well, yeah.
He's an ex-Royal Naval officer who remembers those first few hours of D-Day only too well.
It was very rough. It was a gale blowing when we went in. It was difficult to see through the spray of the waves were bouncing over the craft. It was a dull, a miserable sort of day, not like this at all. On that day, the sea was my enemy. Today, it's my friend. How do you? Oh yeah, I've passed it.
Yeah, you just have to back up on it.
Back
It's
up
like
on
a helicopter. It doesn't stop. It's like a boat.
Yeah. Oh, there
Once
we
you
are.
get it
There we
going,
are. I got
you
it.
get
Yeah, yeah.
There you go.
There. That's not bad, is it? First effort. What
Very
have
good,
What have I
very
got?
That's inflation line.
Yeah.
That's the pneumatic line
Yeah.
that inflated these things.
It's amazing how you managed to do it.
It's neat, isn't it?
For the team, it's another tank located. But for Jimmy, it was a reminder of the men he took over to Omaha over half a century ago.
The Americans were wondering what to expect. In fact, I mean, the commanding officer, Captain Taylor Fellows of A Company, came to me just before the D-Day and spoke to me of his, not apprehension, but he wondered how his troops would react to being under fire, because they hadn't come under fire before, and they weren't assault troops, and they were so heavily laden. They'd come to stay, obviously.
It was the largest invasion force ever assembled. The Allies knew that if the war was going to be won, a full-scale assault on Europe would be inevitable. They devised a plan for the most ambitious sea attack ever. 6,000 ships carrying 175,000 men. The Armada would be supported by a massive air and sea bombardment. The stakes were high. The future of the free world depended on them.
Because we were leading the whole Armada. They had the whole channel full of ships.
Bill Marquardt had never been out of the United States, let alone seen combat.
All you had to do was look back. You could see it was a pretty big invasion. I'd never been in an invasion before, but I don't know how you could get them much bigger.
The preparations for D-Day turned the British Isles into one huge military base. 100,000 Canadians and 2 million Americans were shipped over to train for the invasion. They made up 1/10 of the adult male population of Britain.
The whole island of England was bursting with troops. And as we got towards April, May, June, there was a whole crescendo of feeling built up. Nobody ever actually said, this is it. But we all knew that something was happening.
You can't hide 3 million men and their weapons. So the Allies began a bizarre game of subterfuge. They filled false camps with rubber tanks and trucks to create maximum confusion. On the other side of the channel, the ploy was working. The Germans couldn't be sure where or when the invasion would happen. So there was no choice but to defend the entire coastline. The Atlantic Wall was an impressive defense that stretched 3,000 miles, as far north as Norway. In charge of the French section was Field Marshal Rommel, a brilliant officer with a near-obsessional plan to make his front line impregnable.
We were told the beaches were mined, and there are over 1 million mines on Sword Beach, 1 million mines. And we were shown what was called Rommel's asparagus. This was all the metal struts, each one below tide, so it couldn't be seen when the tide was in, and each one topped with a teller mine, a German mine or a shell, so it would explode on contact.
All the Germans could do was watch and wait. Franz Gockel was just 17 years old when he found himself manning a machine gun overlooking Omaha Beach.
Rommel had been here in the spring, and he said this is an absolutely ideal bay for a landing. There were many discussions about this amongst officers and among the Germans in general. Would the English and Americans land here at this bay, or would they go somewhere else that would be closer to England?
Surprise would be the key to the success of the D-Day invasion. Rather than aim for the French port of Calais, the nearest and most heavily defended place, the Allies decided to go for the unexpected, the beaches of Normandy, over 60 miles away across the Channel. The die was cast. 5 beaches were chosen. These would be center stage of the invasion, divided between American, British, and Canadian forces, codenamed Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juno, and Sword. With so much coastline to defend and little clue as to when the attack would come, all the Germans could do was bide their time. At daybreak on the morning of the 6th of June 1944, Franz Gockel was at his post as thousands of Allied ships steamed towards the coast of Normandy. At first he believed the shadows to be German patrol craft, but soon the shadows grew.
The whole horizon was full of ships. It was ship after ship, as if it were a parade. And we said, before there was any shooting, there are more ships than German soldiers.
Before his eyes, it appeared. The largest armada the world has ever seen. The time was H hour. The day was D-Day. After months of preparation, the DD tank crews were ready.
Okay, 2 minutes, man!
At 5:40 that morning, they were about to lead the invasion.
Okay, the check's done. Yeah, we're fine.
That particular morning, I thought, well, there's going to be a lot of people killed today. I just don't think I'm going to be one of them.
Okay, we're going!
I kept wondering what it would be like once we get there, and will we be able to do what we came here to do. And every morning before I went into battle, I used to say part of the 23rd Psalm. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, will fear no evil.
Brett's been studying the records of that momentous day. They reveal the tanks he's discovered all belong to one unit, the 741st Tank Battalion. According to the history books, 29 tanks were launched over 6,000 meters out. 27 of them sank straight to the bottom. There's something puzzling. Despite the failure of the 741st to make it ashore, DD tanks on other beaches were successful. On Utah Beach, right next to Omaha, 28 launched and every one of them made it. It was the same story on Sword Beach, where Patrick Hennessy also launched successfully.
All except 2, I think, of the ones that launched got to the beach. We all put down the covering fire, which we'd come to do, and we got our infantry ashore with less casualties, in fact, than on other beaches, because we were there, I think.
Set against the success of the tanks on the 4 other beaches, their failure on Omaha is a mystery. The only way Brett can find out what went wrong is to return to the evidence on the seabed.
You could very easily make the argument that, well, if you want to study it, we'll take all 23 of the remaining tanks out and throw them up on the beach and you can study it. But then we lose a tremendous amount of data. We lose the context. We lose the distribution pattern. We lose understanding how far each tank made it.
He needs to look at the exact positions of 6 more tanks because they are not where they should be. It's not going to be easy. The weather has taken a turn for the worse.
You never know what the North Atlantic's going to throw at you. Right now it's supposed to be beautiful and it's not. You get up every morning and you go out and you look at the sea and the weather reports be damned because they're generally not reliable for this area. It's going to get bumpy.
We had 26 knots of wind from the northeast, which effectively, when we go to anchor, we will roll a fair bit, which makes deployment of the ROV extremely difficult and somewhat dangerous as well.
Everybody get a hand.
I keep coming up, man. Every time I thrust forward, I come straight to the surface. Current's pulling the tether this way, and I'm going straight up in the water.
The rough water makes it difficult for the ROV to descend. Worse still, a plankton bloom has appeared overnight.
We've got, what, an inch of visibility?
I don't have much, my friend.
Yeah, I don't think we're going to... I mean, we can barely see our own lights. We're not going to be able to deploy, so we're basically going to fight it for most of the day.
Yeah.
Go in. Don't burn the fuel.
It's been a frustrating day. Even so, Brett is beginning to form a theory that could challenge the official history. The records suggest that it was the rough seas off Omaha that caused the DD tanks to sink straight away. But their final resting place suggests they made it much further than history records.
We're not seeing that it was this immediate sinking. Certainly some sank quickly. We can see quite a few of the tanks made it 3 kilometers plus inshore. So it wasn't just one man behind the other driving directly into the maw of death. I think there was a great deal of hope and a tremendous amount of raw courage to be able to do that.
Johnny called me to come up on top with him to help hold the struts back, because when the waves would hit the side of it, the struts would bend inward and let the water dump into the side of the tank. Waves were shoving it in at the top. That was unusual. We never had that problem. All the training that I had in England, never did I go through anything like that. I wasn't there but a few minutes when I heard the engine quit. I looked up at Johnny and he said, "That's it, let's go." I foolishly went back down inside momentarily to get a Tommy gun and some ammo, because here, if we're going to go to the beach, let's have something to shoot with, you know. When I came back up where she was going under, and I remember I had my foot on the rail like this to step over, and when I did, she went plop. I don't know why I didn't throw that Tommy gun away, because it wouldn't have been any good to anybody with all that salt water. We all had a sense of shame that we didn't do what we were supposed to do, that what we were sent out there to do. Yet we were all glad to be alive. But to brag about the fact that we're alive because we didn't do our job, we didn't feel proud of.
At last, the conditions have improved, and Brett is taking full advantage of the near-perfect visibility. He's brought in a specialist dive team headed by Phil Richards. He hopes that for the first time, the divers will be able to bring back clear pictures of the tanks, and maybe even see inside.
All the hatches should be open, although on this one I think they're just sort of, they're not upright. The driver's hatches are sort of like this. So you won't be able to look in, but you should be able to get a clear view down inside the turret from the command hatch.
Brett has asked Phil to look for distinctive markings that might identify the tanks.
There is a front slope of the tank directly under the gun.
Yep.
Right, so if you're facing the tank, two hatches, the gun's directly above you, come down the front slope of the tank, and just before it starts to curve back under, you'll see a seam with rivets, and right above that there's usually the foundry crest for the where the tank was made.
Yep.
All right, look.
No one knows what they'll find down there, but it might help to explain why the tanks went down.
Can't ask an ROV any questions. You feel a little detached from what's actually going on the bottom. But with a diver, they'll be able to pop their head into the turret and have a look as to how much silt is there, what material might exist inside the tank to specifically identify it. And those are things we couldn't do with an ROV.
The divers are 30 meters deep and have only 30 minutes on the bottom. For their safety, they must stay in constant contact with Barry, the dive supervisor.
Machine gun point. Machine gun
just...
The numbers should be somewhere near that location.
Phil, the foundry mark should be to the right, center, and down from the machine gun.
That identifies the manufacturer.
Yeah.
Can you identify the tank for that? Is there a serial number?
Sometimes.
Right.
Yeah, it depends on what it is, right? You could find one that's like Pacific Car, Rail and Car, and there'd be no data on it at all. And some Ford would have some, GM would have some, but we might be able to sort it.
Okay, there's too much growth on the tank and particles are so on to actually make out any foundry numbers.
This is probably the best preserved of all the tanks that are out here. And if you can't see it on this, we won't find it on any of the others.
All the identifying details on the outside of the tank have disappeared. It's a disappointment. But inside the turret, sheltered from the currents, there's a chance something may have survived.
The breech end of the main gun.
That's great visibility.
Just have a look around and see if I can see any close to the facts on the racket.
I mean, if he can see the breach from the main turret, that's a good 2 meters, meter and a half.
Right.
So you must have
Might be more
inside
sheltered,
that turret.
actually,
Yeah, it's
inside.
good shelter.
There's all sorts of bits and pieces in here that's quite interesting.
All Brett can do is wait until the divers surface before he can discover exactly what they found. Time is running out. They only have a short period in which it is safe to dive each day. After that, the currents become lethal.
Yeah, Phil.
Go ahead.
Yeah, you're on 28 minutes.
Time's up. Their air is low, and the currents are picking up fast.
Phil.
Okay, topside, you're on the way out.
Roger that, you're on your way up. Roger that, divers on surface.
At last, Brett can see the pictures for himself. He's desperate to get a close-up of the inside of the gun turret.
Wait. What's right there?
That's part of the seat, isn't it?
Yeah, that's the underside of the commander. That's the spring in the underside of the commander's seat. That's where the commander sat.
Right, that's the commander's
that would actually fold up out of the way, yeah. It's amazing, you know, this perspective we just didn't get before. But yeah, his seat would be literally right down here. The gunner would be, I mean, literally, you know, pressed right up behind him. And so he would stand up so he could hold the 50 cal and fire. Right.
The inside of the tank is far better preserved than he expected. For an archaeologist, it's ideal. But even though these wrecks aren't official war graves, Brett won't disturb anything out of respect for the men who might have died here.
There's probably a foot and a half of sediment in there. I'd suspect there's lots of personal effects inside these tanks still, yeah.
I could recognize it if I could find my musette bag hooked onto the turret of the tank. I had a British commando knife in it and a camera. I had taken some pictures. I had taken some pictures of the invasion and the men on the ship we were on, the LCT.
But more likely than not, he was outside behind the turret holding the tiller. I think that any time we approach an archaeological site like these tanks, knowing that men did indeed go down in them, there may still be identifiable remains. Certainly, dentition survives well. I don't think there'll be any soft tissue or that sort of thing, but it's possible.
The next morning, the team receives a visit from local diver Jacques Limonchois.
La visibilité, c'est bon?
Oui.
Combien?
3 mètres.
Ah,
Jacques is fascinated by Brett's expedition. He knows these waters well, and over the years he's been salvaging wrecks for his own war museum.
Okay, if you want to see a Dday tank, he'll let you see one tomorrow at the museum. Tomorrow morning at 10h. Ça va bien. Merci beaucoup, très gentil. Au revoir. Merci beaucoup, Mr. Lamassois.
The local research vessel.
Yeah, that's not a bad little boat. That moves.
Jacques has spent his life recovering wrecks from the seabed.
I remember I played in these wrecks, which were broken and which remained in the sea and around the countryside. I remember that well.
Jacques started his career as a demolition diver, an incredibly risky job. He had to destroy the most dangerous wrecks left behind from the Second World War. The whole Normandy coastline was clogged with unexploded bombs that proved lethal to fishermen. Over the years, Jacques has brought up tons of material and sold it for scrap. But when he found the Dday tanks completely intact on the seafloor, he knew he couldn't destroy them.
I said, I'm not going to cut them up. I'm going to save it. And then one day lots of people said, but you must make a museum, because if you don't show the objects, the story will be forgotten. It is the objects which perpetuate the story, the extraordinary story of all these men who gave so much and sacrificed so much.
Thousands of tourists have been fascinated by Jacques' collection. 2 of the missing tanks from the 741st are here in his backyard. But without proper care or preservation, they are literally falling apart.
What about the salt that gets in? See, that's the problem when you immerse iron. The salt gets inside it, and no matter how much you cover it, the salt will come out of solution and crack apart the tank, and eventually it will be gone.
On the seabed, we haven't found a procedure to maintain it in a good state. It's impossible. The sea devours steel. That has always been so. One could treat them with the product, with an electrolytic bath, but it's not possible. They're too big.
I agree with him, it's a tremendous amount of work, but if we accept that they'll all be gone, shouldn't we act now, to save at least one and to restore it properly? Even with his best effort, in 50 years it'll be gone, in 100 years it'll be gone.
More important than the wrecks themselves are the men who died on them.
It is certain that there are wrecks which would be considered war graves. I'm sure there were some who drowned around where the tank sank. They felt they were drowning, they swam badly, the water was very cold. And there were many who drowned on top, on the water around the tank, but not inside.
Brett wants to know how many of the 741st crews perished in their tanks and how many managed to escape. On the cliff tops above Omaha Beach, the American Cemetery holds the names of all those missing or killed in action.
Is the official date that the government declared the individual dead.
Curator Gene Dillinger searches for the names of the men missing in action from the 741st.
Then they may be declared dead a long time after that.
If that's when they deciphered that that's the closest date possible of the official death.
Okay.
So let's see what we got. We got wall of the missing 1, 2, 3, 4. We got 5 on the wall of the missing.
So you got 5 MIA.
On the wall of the missing.
And you've got 11 KIA.
11 men were killed and 5 were reported missing in action on D-Day. The rest were rescued at sea. The survival rate was nothing short of a miracle, but the ramifications were enormous. For the infantry on the beaches who expected the tanks of the 741st to be there to provide cover, it was a catastrophe. Floating helplessly out at sea, the tragedy of the 741st was to witness wave after wave of infantry heading for Omaha without their tanks to protect them.
We had a job to do. I would have much rather went in and took our chances, and I think we could have made a big difference there if we'd got those 27 tanks in. I'm sure we could have saved a lot of men.
The troops were heading for disaster. In the hours before, the Allied Air Force should have bombed the German positions and cratered the beach to provide holes for them to shelter in. But they missed by over 1,000 meters, their bombs falling harmlessly in the fields behind. The men in that first wave had no idea the bombardment had failed, or that the DD tanks would not be there to support them. For Franz Gockel in the cliffs overlooking the beach, the nightmare was just beginning.
There was a comrade who came crawling towards me and said, "Franz, you have to be careful. You mustn't start shooting too early, and then you may have a chance of surviving."
There was almost an unearthly silence. I think they probably got their head down for a moment and watched. I think they waited until the troops came within range before they wiped them out.
When the tide was at its highest, a troop transporter came, a big one with several hundred people on board, and on each side there were rope ladders. Orders were being shouted through megaphones from the bridge. They were trying to get down using those rope ladders. So with this older comrade, I aimed at them, and this rapidly produced chaos on the ship. A lot of men wanted to get down quickly, others wanted to go back up. They were wounded, they were falling down, and there was panic among the Americans.
Ja, auch eine Panikstimmung da.
No cover, no tanks, and the Germans hidden in the cliffs. A very difficult task. And they didn't really have much chance.
"2,000 men died on Omaha Beach that day. One of the survivors, Bob Slaughter, was only 19 at the time.
We were targets in the surf, there's no question about that. I was lying next in the water, and one of the men about 25, 30 yards to my right was the first one I saw trying to cross the beach. And he had a big load on his back, and he was stumbling, and he fell in one of the runnels, and he was lying there. And I don't know whether he was shot and fell, or whether they shot him after he fell. But I saw the blood in that runnel of water, and he started screaming, hollering for a medic, and one of our medics went over to help him. He was working on him, and he got shot. And the medic and both of them were lying on top of each other, both of them screaming, and I'm lying here at the edge of the water thinking about going across. And I just had a chill go up my spine that I just couldn't do it. And then they died, both of them. It just seemed like the machine guns died down a little bit. I said, I'm going. And I just come up out of the water and I started running. "60 pounds I was carrying, and my rifle and my woolen clothes were soaked and heavy, and my shoes and my jacket's full of water. And I was out of breath, and I ran all the way to the base of the seawall. I was frightened, and I was stumbling. My rifle had jammed. It was full of sand and salt water. And I pulled my pack off and my raincoat, and it was shattered. The bullet holes had just shredded my gear. Then I began to really get frightened. My hands shook and trembled. I couldn't get I had a difficult time getting my rifle cleaned, and I tried to light a cigarette and I couldn't get one lit. I was shaking so bad.
For the men who made it those 400 meters across the beach alive, the horror wasn't over. They were trapped, hiding from German gunfire for several hours.
I was 17 years old. It was horrendous. It was the innumerable deaths. There were hundreds and hundreds of soldiers lying on the beach. They were washed towards us on the rising tide. We thought how terrible was such a death. I thought, I only hope this will stop soon.
In Bob Slaughter's regiment, 1 in 4 men were shot as they came up the beach.
It was just a shooting gallery out here. That's all it was. Bullets coming this way and popping over your head, and you could hear the machine gun, you know, brr, 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 up and down the beach. You could hear it, you know, and you could see the tracers. And it was, you know, all the noise, and here you are, 3,000 miles from home, and you're on a beach, and you're looking out towards France, first day of combat. your buddies all around you, you know, and all of us are in trouble. It was, I couldn't believe any of us made it. Couldn't believe it.
Because the infantry had nowhere to hide on Omaha, it was even more tragic that the 741st never made it ashore. The historical records state that the tanks were simply not seaworthy enough to deal with the extremely rough seas of Omaha, and that they sank immediately. But Brett's survey on the seafloor challenges this. Many of the DDs he found did in fact make it close to shore. So what happened? What made them finally sink? With all the diving completed, it's Brett's last chance to confirm the exact positions of the tanks on the seafloor.
Turret's still on.
Yeah, sitting bolt upright.
Sitting bolt upright.
Which side was into the current on that dive?
The starboard side.
Was into the current, so it's facing the beach.
It's facing the beach.
Yeah. Flat on its tracks, straight up, gun elevated, facing the shore.
It's the tank's orientation on the seabed that reveals why they sank. After weeks of investigation, the final pieces of the puzzle have fallen into place. Having now found 19 tanks, he realizes they are all pointing at exactly the same location on land.
The steeple at Colville-sur-Mer is the most visible landmark from the sea. What makes sense is that they were trying to fight the current to stay in this area, and we're heading towards the steeple at Colville-sur-Mer. We know at Utah Beach, other tank battalions use specific landmarks. We know the British in Gold Sector did as well. So it's probable the 741st did. So as they approached the shore, and they were being pushed along in that direction, they would turn and ultimately expose the long side of the tank, which is very fragile, the most flexible, to the waves, which were about 6 feet, and it would crush in the flotation skirt, and it would sink straight away to the bottom.
If the tanks hadn't turned to head for a landmark but gone straight in, keeping the waves behind them, they might have made it to the shore. It was attempting to struggle towards the steeple against the powerful currents at Omaha Beach that forced them to turn side-on to the waves. This made them vulnerable to swamping. They flooded and sank.
These guys were Army, they weren't Navy. Most of them probably didn't have a lot of experience on the water. They launched under incredible duress. They had to get in to protect the infantry. They're the only tankers on this sector that launched, so they probably did the best they could to land where they had to, thinking that it was worth the risk, and ultimately they weren't able to make it.
So why weren't the tanks taken into shore? They may have lost some element of surprise, but they would have got through. As a sailor, Jimmy Green knew that the conditions weren't right to launch that day.
What I couldn't understand is why they didn't go ahead and land them on the beach instead of launching them so far out at sea. I knew a British commander, and he didn't launch his tanks because of the sea, and I think he made the right decision.
So why did the 741st stick to their original orders and launch so far out when others, including their sister battalion, the 743rd, took their tanks right onto the beach? During the course of making this program, one last detail about that lost hour has emerged. A few lines buried in one of the numerous after-action reports, something the tankers from the 741st Battalion never knew.
Just prior to the arrival at the 6,000-yard line, word was passed down the line not to launch the Dday tank due to the rough weather and the probability of their swamping.
In the confusion of that first hour, the order never made it through. An order that could have changed everything for the 741st and for the infantry they were meant to support. Having solved the mystery of the lost tanks, Brett has added another chapter to the history of that momentous day.
They didn't have much of a chance, and yet they were so committed to the task at hand that they were willing to drive tanks off boats into the open ocean 3 miles offshore. And some things you can't explain any more clearly than that. It was just, it's just a daunting task.
The battle for Normandy, although bloody, was decisive. By the end of the day, the Allies had gained a vital foothold toward ultimate victory. Just 3 months later, Phil Fitz, Bill Merkert, and the others found themselves riding their Shermans down the Champs-Élysées at the liberation of Paris. Less than a year after D-Day, Hitler was dead, his army defeated. For the survivors, it was time to go home. Their world would never be the same.
It was such a different life. I was kind of lost. It was the only thing you ever heard was men's voices and everything. It was in a man's army, and you come home and you wake up in the morning, hear your wife's voice, and it was about the sweetest thing you ever hear.
I was about as ready for combat as any human being could possibly be. I was ready to go, and the carnage of D-Day just took all my, all my wind out of my sails. We had no foxholes to get in. We had no support. Everything went wrong. Just snafu. Situation normal, all fouled up. That's a GI expression back in World War II. Only we didn't say fouled.
The tanks lying on the seafloor stand in silent witness to the most decisive battle of the Second World War. Unique monuments to the bravery of the men and women who gave their lives to that great crusade.